Greg has done some things that I don't think that's in the best interest, of our game, and we're coming back to probably the most historic and traditional place in our sport, and I believe it was the right thing.
Golf is a sport built on respect, on tradition, on shaking your opponent's hand no matter how badly they beat you. It is a sport where players are expected to carry themselves with dignity, to honor the game above all else, and to treat the people around them with class. That is the standard. That is what golf has always stood for. Not just on the course, but in the locker room, in meetings, and how you speak about your peers when the cameras stop rolling, but then you say one name. You say Greg Norman, and suddenly the legends of this sport, men who spent their entire careers holding themselves to the highest possible standard, drop that standard completely. They say things they would never say about anyone else. They use words they would never normally use in public. Because when it comes to Greg Norman, even the greatest players who ever lived will look straight into a camera and basically say, no one likes him. Top PG. Legends turned on Greg Norman, and not just because of business. It got deeply personal. 6 of the most respected figures in professional golf history have each had something to say about this man, and every single one of them tells a different part of the same brutal story. And if you want to back this kind of story, why, hit the hype feature right now and give this video some hype while we keep going, because this one goes deep. The story does not start with money. It does not start with LIV Golf or Saudi Arabia or any of the headlines you have seen in the last few years. It starts in 1994 at Sherwood Country Club in California, where a younger Greg Norman stood in a room full of the most powerful people in professional golf and told them he had a better idea. He called it the World Golf Tour. It would feature the top 30 players in the world, 8 events a year spread across 4 continents, with winners' prizes of $600,000 at a time, when the average tour prize was less than a third of that. On paper, it sounded like progress. In that room, it felt like a grenade. The PGA Tour's response came before Norman even finished speaking. Commissioner Tim Fincham had already sent a memo to every player on tour, warning that anyone who joined an unauthorized rival circuit would face immediate suspension. They called it the guillotine memo. It was a clear message: fall in line or get cut out. But the moment that truly ended the World Golf Tour, the moment that shaped the next 30 years of professional golf, did not come from a memo. It came from a man standing up in that room and walking out. Arnold Palmer was 65 years old at Sherwood. He had long since stopped competing at the highest level, but his authority in that room was absolute. When Palmer spoke, everyone listened, and what Palmer said that day was not about finances or field sizes or television deals. It was about something much older than any of that. He invoked the legacy of the Big Three himself, Jack Nicklaus and Gary Player, and he reminded everyone present that they had been offered their own chances to break away, to take the money and build something entirely separate from the tour. They had said no every single time, not because they could not have profited enormously, but because they believed the tour was worth protecting. Palmer told Norman he would not support the plan, and then he walked out of the room. Norman later described himself as shell-shocked. He said he felt ostracized by the very men he had looked up to. And from that day forward, the narrative around Greg Norman began to harden into something that would never fully soften. Number 6. Fred Couples. Fred Couples is not someone known for sharp words. He is relaxed, he is liked by nearly everyone, and he generally keeps his opinions about other players to himself, which is exactly what makes what he said about Greg Norman so remarkable. During the height of the LIV controversy, Couples did not talk about business models or tour policies. He went straight to the personal. He said that no one has liked Norman for 25 years. He used the word insufferable. He was not speaking in hypotheticals. He was not speculating about what other people thought. He was stating plainly and directly what he had observed across a career spent in the same circles as Norman. According to the report's analysis, Couples' core complaint is about the gap between who Greg Norman appears to be in public and who he actually is behind the scenes. The great white shark persona, the charisma, the easy smile, the way Norman carries himself in front of cameras, none of that matched what Couples says he witnessed when the cameras were off. The word the report uses is prickly. Another word it uses is churlish. Couples believed that Norman had a self-professed expertise on everything, an arrogance that extended beyond golf into every conversation, every room he walked into. And for Couples, the fact that Norman ended up leading LIV Golf did not surprise him at all. It was not a man trying to grow the game. It was a man with a very large ego finding a very large stage. Number 5. Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods does not do personal conflict in public. That is almost a rule with him. He has spent his entire career saying the right things, deflecting controversy, keeping disputes private. So when Tiger Woods looked into a camera during the LIV era and said that Greg has to go, people paid attention, because that is not the kind of thing Tiger says lightly. That is not the kind of thing Tiger says at all. The report frames Woods' opposition in terms that go beyond professional disagreement. According to the analysis, Woods believes that Norman is not actually trying to improve professional golf. He believes Norman is motivated by a decades-long desire to damage the PGA Tour, a vendetta that has been building since 1994. In Woods' view, the personal animosity Norman carries toward the tour is so deep, so ingrained, that no real negotiation can happen while Norman is in charge. It is not that the two sides disagree on terms, it is that one of the people at the table, according to Woods, is not negotiating in good faith. He is settling a score. This is worth sitting with for a moment. Tiger Woods reportedly turned down an offer somewhere between $700 million and $800 million to join LIV Golf. He said no to that number because he believed the tour and its history were worth protecting. He bet his financial future on an institution he believed in. And then he looked at the man leading the other side and said he needs to be removed before anything can be resolved. When someone who just turned down nearly $1 billion says the problem is not the money, you probably believe them. Number 4. Rory McIlroy. Rory McIlroy did not start out as Greg Norman's enemy. That is the part of the story that the report highlights as particularly revealing. In the early days of the LAV conflict, McIlroy was actually one of the more measured voices. He was diplomatic. He tried to see multiple angles. He left room for the possibility that conversations could happen, that the two sides could find some kind of common ground. And then Norman called him brainwashed. According to the report, the specific turning point came when Norman told the Washington Post that McIlroy had been brainwashed by the PGA Tour. The word itself was the problem. It was not just a disagreement. It was a suggestion that McIlroy was not smart enough or independent enough to form his own opinions. It was condescending in a very public way, and it came after what McIlroy apparently felt had been a private exchange where Norman had seemed reasonable and even warm. The switch felt dishonest. It felt like a betrayal of a private conversation. Yeah, McIlroy's response was not subtle. He said he would make it his business to be a pain in Norman's backside for as long as this fight continued. He described Norman as using players as pawns in a personal war. He was not talking about tour structures or broadcast rights anymore. He was talking about character, and he had decided based on that one moment that Norman lacked it. Number 3. Davis Love III. Davis Love III has a specific kind of credibility in this conversation. He is not just a PGA Tour loyalist talking in general terms, he was actually there. He was the one sent to summon Greg Norman to Arnold Palmer's office in 1995, the meeting that followed the fallout from Sherwood. He has a long memory of Norman's behavior, and he has watched the same patterns repeat themselves over 30 years. What Love III focused on? Now, according to the report, is honesty. Not strategy, not money, not the structure of professional golf. Honesty. His specific complaint is that Norman told younger players things that were not true, particularly around the legal protections available to them if they joined LIV. Norman reportedly claimed the PGA Tour could not legally suspend players who defected. Love III called that claim so untrue. He believed it was a deliberate attempt to mislead players who were young enough or uncertain enough to take Norman at his word and make career decisions based on information that was false. For Love III, this is what makes the Norman situation different from a normal business dispute. A normal business dispute involves two sides with different interests but good faith arguments. What Love III describes is one side telling lies to gain an advantage at the expense of players who trusted them. He used the phrase that it fractured the game's soul. That is not language you use about a contract disagreement. That is language you use when you think something genuinely wrong has been done. Number 2. Nick Faldo. Nick Faldo and Greg Norman are linked forever by one moment, the 1996 Masters. Norman entered that final round with a 6-shot lead. He had the tournament in his hands. And then, hole by hole, it slipped away, and Faldo, grinding and relentless and completely unmoved by the pressure, came from behind to win. It is one of the most famous collapses in the history of the sport. Faldo has spoken about Norman's mental makeup in terms that go beyond that single event. The phrase the report returns to is moral fiber. Faldo's argument, shaped by years of competing against Norman at the highest level, is that Norman's public confidence was always something of a performance. The swashbuckling style, the charisma, the big personality, it looked like the real thing from the outside. But under genuine pressure, according to Faldo, the substance behind the performance was not there. He believed the gap between Norman's image and his inner toughness was the real story of their rivalry. In the context of LIV Golf, Faldo's view follows a consistent line. He sees Norman's choice to lead a rival circuit not as a visionary decision, but as another version of the same act. Chase the spotlight, make the big move, prioritize the dramatic gesture over the quiet, disciplined work of actually building something lasting. For Faldo, Norman has always been more interested in being seen as important than in doing the hard, unglamorous work that truly important people do. And in golf, Faldo believes, the hard work eventually tells the truth about everyone. Number 1. Jack Nicklaus. If there is a relationship in this entire story that captures just how far things have fallen, it is the one between Greg Norman and Jack Nicklaus. For 40 years, these two men were close. Nicklaus was a mentor. Norman looked up to him. They were, by every account, genuine friends. And then everything broke. Nicklaus was offered more than $100 million to serve as a frontman for LIV Golf. He turned it down, not after long deliberation, not with regret. He turned it down and publicly reaffirmed his loyalty to the tour he had helped build from the ground up. To Nicklaus, the offer itself was almost beside the point. His legacy was not for sale at any price. Norman's response to that rejection is where the 40-year friendship ended. He called Nicklaus a hypocrite in an interview with the Washington Post. He claimed that Nicklaus had attended a LIV presentation and sent an email saying the league had his blessing and was good for the game. Nicklaus and his team disputed this entirely. They said the meeting was a courtesy arranged through his son because of Saudi golf course design contracts, and that Nicklaus had zero interest in the project once its full implications became clear. The conflict deepened in a way that most people did not see coming. The Nicklaus Companies, a business entity in which Nicklaus no longer holds a controlling interest, actually filed a lawsuit against Nicklaus himself. Their argument was that they had to step in to protect him from involvement in something that could permanently damage his reputation. The report describes the final outcome simply. Nicklaus emphasized that his loyalty to the tour he helped found was not for sale, and the respect he once held for Norman was gone completely. For the people who study this conflict, the Nicklaus breakdown is the detail that makes everything feel real. Business disputes happen. Public arguments happen. But when a 40-year friendship ends, when a man who once mentored you publicly calls you a hypocrite, and you respond by saying the meeting was a courtesy, and you had zero interest, something much deeper than a business disagreement has taken place. The report's analysis of all of this lands on a phrase worth repeating: historical trauma, personal distaste, and institutional preservation. Those are the three forces the research identifies as driving the collective opposition to Greg Norman. They are not the same force. They do not all come from the same place, but they point in the same direction. The historical trauma is what Palmer and Nicklaus carry. They built something. They made sacrifices to build it. And then a man they respected tried to dismantle it in 1994, and again in 2022. To them, it is the same fight with a bigger budget. The personal distaste is what Couples and Faldo describe. Nothing to do with tour structures or legal arguments. Just a man whose private behavior did not match his public image, and whose arrogance wore on the people around him over decades. The institutional preservation is what Woods and McIlroy represent. A new generation that did not live through 1994, but that has decided the tour is worth defending, and that Norman's leadership makes peace impossible. Put all three together, and you get 30 years of a conflict that never fully resolved because it was never really just about one thing. Every time it looked like it might cool down, something new happened. A comment to a newspaper, a phone call described differently by two different people in two different interviews, a friendship that began as mentorship and turned into a public dispute and then a lawsuit. The layers kept building on top of each other until the weight of them became impossible to ignore. Golf as a sport has survived all of it. The tour is still operating. Great players are still competing every single week. Fans are still watching in huge numbers. The game itself is bigger than any of this. And that is probably the most important thing to hold on to when the noise gets loud. The legends who pushed back against Norman did so because they loved the game enough to fight for it. Even if the fight got ugly, even if things were said that cannot be unsaid, the hope, and it is a very real one, is that professional golf finds a version of itself that does not require one side to destroy the other. The players coming up right now, the ones who were teenagers when LIV launched, will inherit whatever structure ultimately survives this era. They deserve a game that works. They deserve a game that honors what Palmer and Nicklaus built, while also being big enough and modern enough for what comes next. The conflict between Greg Norman and the legends of the PGA Tour has already shaped the history of this sport, more than most people fully appreciate. What happens next is still being written. If you have made it this far through the story, leave a comment below with your honest take on where the blame actually sits. Subscribe if you are brand new, and we will see you in the next one.
Two men own their golf swings, Ben Hogan and Moe Norman. Hogan's legend is well known. But despite the fact that Moe Norman competed in the Masters, his story is not. Why? Chris Connolly now with the story of Moe Norman, a man who lived far outside the pristine cookie-cutter world of the PGA Tour.
Top PGA legends explain why they hated Moe Norman. That's not clickbait, that's history. The greatest ball striker in golf history became the most hated man on the PGA Tour. Not because he couldn't play, but because he didn't fit their picture of what a champion should look like. Legends like Sam Snead, Ken Venturi, and Jack Nicklaus all played a role in his downfall. Some mocked him openly, others just turned their backs. But the result was the same. A genius was driven out of the game he mastered. If this story shocks you already, drop some hype on this video. It helps us tell stories like this one. Moe Norman could do something nobody else could do. He could hit a golf ball with perfect precision, shot after shot, day after day. Modern physics has proven his swing was nearly flawless, yet he never became rich. He never became famous. He spent most of his career sleeping in his car and bowling for spare change in the winter. Why? Because in the 1950s and 60s, the PGA Tour cared more about how you looked than how you played. And Moe Norman looked wrong. He wore stained clothes, his teeth were rotting. He didn't bathe regularly, he talked too fast and repeated himself. He avoided eye contact. To the establishment, these weren't just quirks. They were crimes against the image of golf as a gentleman's game. The PGA was building a brand. Clean-cut, polished, marketable. Moe didn't fit the mold, so they broke him instead. Let's count down the legends who made sure of it. Number 7. Even Jack Nicklaus, who later praised Moe's ability, admitted the truth. The golfing world shunned Moe because he was different. Nicklaus confirmed it was a collective action. The top legends all agreed. Moe didn't belong. His nomadic lifestyle, his lack of hygiene, these things kept him from being invited to major events. Nicklaus's honesty is rare. Most wouldn't admit it, but he acknowledged the shunning was real and institutional. It wasn't one bad guy, it was the entire system. The irony? Moe's nomadic lifestyle was often a result of the poverty he'd lived in. Poverty caused by the very people who used it as an excuse to exclude him further. Nicklaus saw the genius in Moe's swing, but he also saw how the establishment treated difference. And he confirmed what Moe always felt, that he was cast out not for his game, but for who he was. Number 6. Ken Venturi offered a different kind of cruelty, intellectual cruelty. When asked why Moe never made it on the U.S. Tour, Venturi didn't mention lack of skill. He pointed to unsettling personal habits. Lack of hygiene? This was the official narrative. The tour leadership rationalized his exclusion by framing it as a hygiene issue. But that was a lie, or at least only part of the truth. Moe's rapid speech, his repetition, his avoidance of eye contact, these were symptoms of what we now understand as autism. But in the 1950s, they were just weird, unsettling. The word Venturi used is revealing. Moe made them uncomfortable. And rather than try to understand why, they used his differences as justification for a total boycott. Venturi became the voice of the establishment, the man who explained away their cruelty by calling it standards. He didn't swing a club at Moe. He didn't have to. His words did the damage. By labeling Moe's behavior as unsettling, he gave every player permission to turn their backs. Number 5. Years later, Peter Jacobson wrote about Moe in his book Buried Lies. He described Moe's car, a vehicle that doubled as a home and was filled with rotting food. He talked about Moe's grimy hands, his clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. These stories became locker room legends. They turned Moe into a cautionary tale, a punchline. The irony is crushing. Those grimy hands created the purest golf shots anyone had ever seen. But his peers couldn't separate the genius from the grime. The locker room became a place where social norms were enforced through mockery, and Moe was the favorite target. Jacobson's stories weren't just memories, they were weapons. Each retelling reinforced the idea that Moe was other, that he was dirty, that he deserved to be laughed at. The shock Jacobson described wasn't concern, it was revulsion, and he shared it with everyone who would listen. Number 4. Sam Snead embodied everything Moe wasn't. Polished, charismatic, marketable. Snead wore his signature straw hat and charmed sponsors with ease. When he encountered Moe, he was stunned. The rotting teeth, distinct smell. Snead thought Moe was unmarketable, and in the world Snead lived in, unmarketable meant worthless. This is key. The hatred wasn't just personal disgust, it was economic. The PGA Tour was becoming a business. Television was getting involved. Sponsors wanted clean faces to represent their brands. A man who repulsed people couldn't be the face of anything, so Moe was seen as a threat, not to their games, to their wallets. The gentleman image wasn't just a preference, it was a commercial requirement, and Moe violated it every time he opened his mouth. Snead looked at Moe and saw a liability, someone who could damage the brand they were all building. So he made sure everyone knew, this man doesn't belong with us. Number 3. Cruelty reached its peak at Augusta National. The Masters is golf's most sacred tournament, a place where tradition and decorum are religion. In 1956, Moe Norman qualified to play. He'd earned his spot, but the moment he arrived, the mockery began. Doug Ford was a major champion, a fixture of the era. He looked down on Moe's stained clothing. So did the others. They whispered. They laughed. They made sure Moe knew he didn't belong. Moe had a brutal inferiority complex. He was painfully shy. The ridicule cut deep, so deep that he tried to hide. He slept in his car. He slept in sand traps on the course. Anywhere but the clubhouse where Ford and the gentlemen gathered. Eventually, he couldn't take it anymore. He quit the tournament. Mid-competition. Just walked away. Not because he couldn't compete, but because the shame was unbearable. Ford didn't just reject Moe. He humiliated him in front of the entire golf world at the sport's most prestigious event. The message was clear. You don't belong here. And Moe believed it. He came back in 1957. Shot a respectable 74, but nothing had changed. The veteran pros ignored him. Shelley Mayfield, Ed Fergal, Jimmy Demaret. When asked about Moe, they just shrugged. He was a non-entity. Moe himself said he missed the cut because he didn't have enough money to stay for 2 more days. He hitchhiked to tournaments. He didn't own golf shoes. Once he refused to accept $3 in winnings from Dick Chapman out of some misplaced sense of hospitality. The legends didn't see a struggling athlete. They saw someone who didn't understand the rules. Not the rules of golf, the rules of status. And Ford made sure those rules were enforced with maximum cruelty. Number 2, George Knudsen took it further than anyone. Knudsen was brilliant in his own right, technical master, but he didn't just avoid Moe, he confronted him, face to face. Knudsen told Moe he smelled. He told him his teeth were literally a dentist's retirement plan. He gave Moe an ultimatum: clean up or you'll never be a real professional. Think about that. Knudsen wasn't questioning Moe's swing. He was questioning his humanity. To Knudsen, the smell was a barrier, not a barrier to friendship. A barrier to recognition. Moe could hit shots nobody else could hit. But if he smelled like the car he slept in, none of that mattered. Skill was secondary to presentation. Genius was secondary to soap. Knudsen's confrontation was brutal because it was direct. He didn't gossip behind Moe's back. He said it to his face. You're not good enough. Not because of your game, because of your body, because of how you live. Knudsen drew the line, and Moe was on the wrong side of it. Number 1. The rejection started closest to home. Al Balding was a fellow Canadian. He worked hard to establish himself as a respected pro on the international stage. He wanted to be seen as polished, professional, elite. Then there was Moe. Balding saw him as a national embarrassment, someone who made Canadian golf look bad. Moe refused to wear clean clothes. He ignored the dress code. He showed up to tournaments looking like he'd slept in a ditch, which sometimes he had. Balding admitted he was cold toward Moe because of his unkempt state. This wasn't about golf, it was about gatekeeping. Balding was telling the world that he wasn't like Moe, that he belonged with the elites, and Moe didn't. The cruelty of Balding's rejection cuts deepest because they were supposed to be on the same team, both Canadians. Both fighting for recognition in a sport dominated by Americans. But Balding chose the establishment over his countrymen. He chose image over loyalty, and in doing so, he set the tone. If even Moe's fellow Canadian rejected him, why would anyone else accept him? The breaking point came in 1959. Greater New Orleans Open. Moe finished 4th, a strong performance. But instead of congratulations, he got a meeting. PGA officials and leading players called him in for a formal dressing down. They had a list of grievances: his antics, talking to the gallery during competition, performing trick shots, his refusal to use a caddy, which they saw as unprofessional, and of course, his appearance. The message was clear: shape up or ship out. Moe, with his inferiority complex and his inability to navigate social hierarchies, this wasn't a warning. It was an execution. He felt devastated, let down. He vowed never to return to regular competition in the United States. And he didn't. His career on the world's biggest stage was over. The legends didn't see it as bullying. They saw it as weakness. Critics said he ran away, that winners don't run, that real champions don't throw tournaments because they're insecure. This narrative stuck, and it still affects his legacy today. Moe Norman is not in the World Golf Hall of Fame. The reason's given: lack of American PGA Tour victories. Failure to conform to tournament rules. Gary Player reportedly spoke of his unprofessional conduct. The hatred from the 1950s still shapes the official history. Even in death, Moe can't escape their judgment. What the legends saw as insanity was actually autism. Moe's obsessive focus on practice, his sensory sensitivities that led to peculiar clothing choices, his social withdrawal. These weren't character flaws, they were symptoms of a neurological condition. But the PGA legends lived in a world that didn't understand neurodiversity. They met difference with aggression. When Moe walked away from fans, they thought he was rude. When he squeezed someone's hand too hard, they thought he was violent. When he held a fellow golfer by the ankles and shook him to see how much change he had, they thought he was dangerous. These were sensory overload reactions, social anxiety, lack of social filters, but to the legends, they were personal affronts, signs of a man who failed to meet the standard of a gentleman. The economic consequences were brutal. Driven off the U.S. tour, Moe was stuck on the Canadian circuit. Purses were tiny. He spent most of his life in poverty, living in motels, sometimes above bars. In the winter, he worked as a pin setter in a bowling alley. While Nicklaus and Snead built massive personal brands and endorsement deals, Moe was knocking down pins for minimum wage. The contrast is sickening. Eventually, Titleist gave Moe $5,000 a month for life. They called it back pay. It was really an admission of guilt, an acknowledgement that the industry had wronged him. They owed him for what they'd taken. The hatred was so deep it affected future generations. Some claim that Moe's behavior at the Masters soured relations between Augusta and Canadian amateur golf for over 50 years. That Canadian amateur champions weren't invited back because of him. Whether that's true or legend, it shows how he was viewed. Not just as a misfit, but as poison. A man whose shadow haunted the sport long after he left. So why do they hate him? It wasn't just one thing. It was everything he represented, a threat to their status. If a man who slept in his car could outplay the best in the world, what did that say about them? Their elite status was exposed as a social construct, not a measure of pure ability. He was a marketing liability. In an era of rising sports commerce, Moe couldn't be sold. His smell, his teeth, his unkempt appearance threatened the tour's ability to present itself as high society. He disrupted their rituals. Golf is a slow, deliberate game. Moe played fast. He didn't use a caddy. He did trick shots. To them, these were desecrations of the gentleman's game. And finally, they didn't understand autism. They saw madness where there was neurodivergence, arrogance where there was anxiety. They hated what they couldn't understand. Moe Norman was the mirror that reflected the limits of their tolerance. He was the greatest ball striker who ever lived. But he wasn't a gentleman. And in the 1950s PGA, that mattered more. Here's the truth they didn't want to admit. Moe Norman loved golf more purely than any of them. He didn't play for money. He didn't play for fame. He played because hitting a perfect shot gave him a feeling of greatness. That feeling was real, even when the world told him he was worthless, even when legends mocked him and officials expelled him, even when he slept in sand traps and bowled for pennies. He kept swinging, and every swing was perfect. The legends played for image. Moe played for perfection. They wore the right clothes and said the right things and built the right brands. He wore whatever he had and said whatever came to mind and built nothing but his swing. In the end, their legacies are polished and institutional. His is raw and human. They're remembered for what they won. He's remembered for what he overcame, or tried to. The tragedy is that he shouldn't have had to overcome anything. His swing was enough. It should have been enough. But golf wasn't ready for a genius who didn't fit the mold. So they broke the mold instead of breaking their rules. Moe Norman died in 2004. By then, some had apologized. Some acknowledged his brilliance. Titleist gave him that monthly check. The Hall of Fame still won't let him in. The establishment still holds the line. They'll praise his swing in documentaries. They'll call him a legend in retrospectives. But they won't give him the one thing he earned. Recognition, not as a troubled genius or an eccentric outlier, but as a champion. A man who played the game better than almost anyone and paid the price for being different. The feeling of greatness Moe chased his whole life? He had it in his hands every time he swung. The legends just refused to see it. And that says everything about them. Nothing about him.
You know, and I'm thinking, geez, all these people are here, they want to see me shoot 59, you know, and I'm the one that has to do it, you know. And
At 83 years old, Al Geiberger finally admits he had no talent for hiding the truth about the people who frustrated him most. For decades, the world knew him as Mr. 59, the calmest golfer ever to touch a club. His swing was pure poetry in motion. His demeanor was steady and unshakable. He seemed impossible to rattle. But at 83, he is naming 5 specific golfers who tested him. If this story is hitting you hard, give it hype and let others know. These 5 people were more than just opponents. They represented the psychological noise he had to battle every day. They were sources of friction throughout his career. The first battle we are going to explore is number 5, and that is Lee Trevino, the Merry Mex himself. Trevino was famous for his constant talking and joke cracking. He joked between shots, he joked during shots, he joked after shots, he joked with everyone. For Geiberger, this was absolute torture. Geiberger needed silence and internal focus. He needed to live inside his own mind, locked onto the rhythm of his swing. Trevino's constant chatter was like someone yelling at you while you try to sleep. In 1976, at the Greater Greensboro Open, Geiberger won at 268, 16 under par. Trevino finished right behind at 270, 14 under. That was just 2 strokes back. But it was not a lucky win for Geiberger. He had to actively fight for it. He had to turn his ears off and block out Trevino's mouth and just play his game. You could argue that Trevino's charm was a weapon. The constant talking broke concentration. Geiberger believed golf required your subconscious mind. Trevino's talking interrupted that completely. It made Geiberger work harder. The two players were psychological opposites. Trevino used words to stay loose and manage nerves. Geiberger used silence and internal calm. Number 4 is Dave Hill, the vocal critic who filled the tour with negativity and noise. Hill was not a rival in the traditional sense. He was a voice. He was a presence. He complained about golf courses constantly and loudly. He complained about tour management. He complained about the rules and conditions. He complained about nearly everything golf-related. For someone like Geiberger who sought peace on the course, Hill's constant negativity was unbearable and exhausting. Hill would say the worst part of golf is hitting the ball. He seemed to hate the very thing he dedicated his entire life to pursuing. In 1974 at the Sahara Invitational, Geiberger won at 273, 11 under par. Hill finished 3 strokes back as a runner-up. But even when Hill lost, he was vocal about it. Hill's negativity and complaining filled the air on tour wherever he went. He brought conflict and discord to the structure of the tour itself. For Geiberger, Hill represented more than a tough competitor. He was the embodiment of the noise Geiberger tried desperately to escape every single day. It feels like Geiberger's response to Hill was a defense mechanism to maintain his own focus and inner peace. Number 3 is Jack Nicklaus, and this one is interesting because Geiberger did not necessarily hate Nicklaus, the man himself. He hated the Nicklaus universe that surrounded him. Nicklaus was the gold standard. He was the benchmark that everyone measured themselves against. Every time Geiberger won, every time he played brilliantly, the media wanted to talk about Nicklaus instead. In 1975 at the Tournament Players Championship at Colonial Country Club, the heat was brutal, over 100 degrees. Geiberger played wire-to-wire with steady, intelligent golf. He won at 270, 10 under par, setting a course record at the time. He beat Dave Stockton by 3 strokes. That was dominant, impressive golf. But what did the media want to discuss? Jack Nicklaus. Nicklaus was the defending champion. He played terribly. He finished tied for 8th place at 7 over par. His score was so bad it overshadowed Geiberger's remarkable win. The narrative became, why did Nicklaus lose instead of why did Geiberger play so brilliantly? Geiberger said he was always looking over his shoulder to see where the Golden Bear was coming from. Even when Nicklaus was nowhere near the leaderboard, his name was being discussed and analyzed. In 1975, Geiberger finished 6th on the money list. But Nicklaus finished 1st. Geiberger made tremendous money, but Nicklaus made even more. It feels like Geiberger's frustration was rooted in truth, mixed with something deeper. He was winning. He was playing great golf, but the world wanted Nicklaus stories. That kind of constant comparison eats at you over time. Number 2 is Lee Lynch, and this is perhaps the most revealing figure on the list because Lynch was Geiberger's own caddy, his own employee, his own support person. Yet Geiberger listed him as one of the people he hated most. That detail tells you everything about the relationship. Lynch was described as mean, crusty, and relentlessly negative. He was so difficult that other players joked that having Lynch on your bag was like starting every tournament with a 2-shot penalty already built in. Imagine that. You could start any event knowing that your own person, the one supposed to help you and support you, was actually working against your confidence and your mental strength. In 1977 at the Memphis Classic, Geiberger shot 59, the first sub-60 round in PGA Tour history. That is 11 birdies, 1 eagle, and no bogeys. It was perfect golf. But Lynch, standing right there witnessing this historic moment unfold, responded by saying if Geiberger had actually listened to him, he would have shot 57. Instead of celebrating, Lynch criticized. Instead of supporting, he tore down the moment and the achievement. For Geiberger, a player who believed the worst thing you can do is count your score during a round, Lynch's negativity was psychological poison every single day. Geiberger needed to believe in himself completely. He needed to trust his swing and let his subconscious mind control his body. Lynch was there every shot, every round, telling him he was wrong. It comes off like Lynch wanted Geiberger to fail, or at the very least that Lynch could not help but be negative about every achievement. Number 1 is Gary Player, the relentless fitness fanatic who represented the future of golf itself. Player was dedicated to his body in ways other golfers were not at that time. He worked out constantly. He never gave up. He kept coming at you hard round after round, tournament after tournament, year after year without fail. In 1975 at the Moe Tournament of Champions at La Costa, Geiberger opened with 2 straight rounds of 67. He was dominating the field, but Player charged hard in the final round with a 67 of his own and forced a sudden death playoff. Both finished at 277, 11 under par. Geiberger won the playoff, but barely. Player made him fight for it. Geiberger said Player made him feel like he was surviving a war, like he had been in combat. That is powerful language. Player represented the future of golf as an athletic endeavor, a sport where physical fitness would become a major weapon. Geiberger later had his colon removed in 1980. His body was struggling. When you have a player like Player across from you who is getting stronger every year, that pressure builds in your mind. But here's what really matters most. Despite all this friction, despite all these voices and pressures trying to break his focus, Geiberger still won. He won big. He recorded 11 PGA Tour victories. He won a major championship. He shot the first 59 in history, which remains one of the greatest rounds ever played. On the senior tour, he won 10 more times and was named Comeback Player of the Year in 1996. He beat many of these same people again when they were all older and supposedly less threatening. He won at the Vantage Championship over Dave Hill himself. He won the Seniors International. He won the Las Vegas Senior Classic. He won the Infinity Tournament of Champions multiple times. He won the Greater Naples IntelliNet Challenge. The noise did not destroy him. The friction did not break him. Instead, he learned to live with it and thrive anyway. He found a way to maintain his inner peace despite all the external chaos and negativity surrounding him. He wanted peace in a world of noise, and somehow he built a lasting career that proved you absolutely can find it if you are strong enough. If you enjoyed this story of resilience, subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you never miss our deepest dives into sports history.
He says to me, "Not even you can screw this up tomorrow." That was not "Goodbye, Greg, good luck tomorrow." He says that comment. I go,
I would tell a guy, Jack Nicklaus instilled in me when I asked him some tips when I first got on tour. He said, "Mark, I hope you play great." I played with him in the last round at Doral in 1985 when I was lucky enough to win.
I hated him. That is what Mark McCumber said, and he meant it deeply. The guy on the left in that thumbnail had 4 specific golfers he could not stand. 4 men who violated everything he believed in. But this was not petty drama or personal vendetta. McCumber saw himself as a guardian of something sacred, a protector of the field, a sentinel standing watch over the rules of the game. He believed golf only worked if everyone played the same game by the same rules. His hatred came from something deeper than spite or envy, a commitment to integrity so fierce and so absolute that he would challenge the biggest names in the sport, on camera, during major tournaments, in front of millions. Because protecting the field mattered more than being liked, more than making friends, more than his own reputation and career. These 4 rivalries will show you exactly why he felt that way. And by the end, you might understand that his hatred was actually something else entirely. Have you ever thought about what makes someone care enough to be the bad guy in the story? If you like stories about golf's greatest feuds and the men who refuse to back down, hit the hype button right now. Give us some hype. Show us some love. These stories deserve to be heard, and with your support, we can keep bringing you the real drama and controversy behind professional golf. As McCumber moved to broadcasting, he noticed something troubling. Tiger Woods was changing the game, not just his talent or his wins, the energy. McCumber noticed Tiger brought an attitude different from Jack Nicklaus or Arnold Palmer, an attitude like he was bigger than the game itself, like he could intimidate officials, like his brand mattered more than the rules. The modern superstar era brought intimidation that never existed before. The deference shown to Woods created an environment where players could influence governance, where the superstar felt untouchable. This lens explains McCumber's earlier battles. His feuds were about fighting disrespect for the rules, fighting gamesmanship, fighting players who thought they were bigger than the game. Now let's look at the 4 men who made Mark McCumber say, "I hated him." Number 1, Davis Love III. Davis was not a villain. He was not a bad guy. He was one of the most popular players on tour, a fan favorite, talented, well-liked, respected. But that is exactly why this moment matters. Because McCumber did not care who you were. During the 1994 Players' Championship at TPC Sawgrass, Love made a procedural mistake with a golf drop. He was being too casual, too loose, not following exact technical requirements of the rulebook. For McCumber, being popular meant nothing. Being talented meant nothing. Being loved by fans meant nothing. The drop was either right or it was wrong. There was no middle ground. There was no gray area. McCumber challenged him publicly. He said something that defined his entire philosophy forever. "I am not here to make friends. I am here to protect the field." That quote tells you everything about McCumber's worldview and his commitment. Every single player in that tournament had a responsibility to every other player. a duty to follow the rules exactly as written. Any deviation from the rules was disrespect to the field. This was not personal against Davis Love III. It was institutional. It was about maintaining order. It was about saying that nobody gets special treatment. Not the nice guys, not the fan favorites, not anyone. By 1994, McCumber was at his peak. He was the top American on the money list that year. He had won 10 tournaments on the PGA Tour, including the 1988 Players' Championship. He had influence on matters of governance and course design. When he challenged Davis, people listened. People knew this was not envy or conflict. This was a man protecting the integrity of the field. TPC Sawgrass was designed as a pure test of golf. It was sacred ground for McCumber. He had won there in 1988 with a score of 273. Then Davis matched that in 1992. Then Greg Norman shattered it with 264. So there was something about that year, scores dropping so low, and McCumber felt the rigor had to stay high to preserve tournament integrity. Love was caught in that moment, but he represented a principle McCumber would never compromise on. Number 2, Greg Norman. August 24th, 1995, Firestone Country Club. This was the most explosive conflict of McCumber's career. This was not just golf. This had politics underneath it, power dynamics, the future of professional golf at stake. Norman was watching from 12 to 15 feet away. He saw McCumber press down a spike mark in his line of putt. Pressing spike marks was strictly prohibited. It could give an unfair advantage. Norman claimed it was cheating. McCumber denied it. He said he removed a bug, just a small insect. Nothing intentional, but Norman was absolutely furious. He was the world's #1 player at that time, the Great White Shark. His anger was so intense that he said about the back nine that followed, "I could have bench pressed 500 pounds. I was that mad." Think about that. The rage was physical. The rage was overwhelming. Norman refused to sign McCumber's scorecard at the end of the round. In golf, that is the most formal accusation you can make. Refusing to sign a scorecard means you are calling the other player a cheater. It is the ultimate statement. It requires intervention from the very top. Tim Fincham, the PGA Tour commissioner, had to get involved. Norman's wife Laura had to calm him down. They had to prevent the world's #1 player from withdrawing from the tournament completely in protest. This was absolute chaos at the highest level of professional golf. But here's the key moment that changed everything. There was no official present when it happened. No observer. No referee. It was player against player. Word against word. Pure, he said. She said. The rules dictated that when you cannot prove something happened, when there is no definitive evidence, the benefit of the doubt goes to the player whose ball is in question. So McCumber was cleared officially, he won the dispute, he won the ruling, but Norman was convinced he was getting preferential treatment, insider treatment. And Norman believed there was more to it than just the incident on that green, much more. McCumber was a leading voice against Norman's proposed World Golf Tour, a rival circuit that Norman was trying to launch at the time against the PGA Tour. So Norman thought McCumber was an insider at the tour, someone who had institutional power and leverage, someone protecting his own position and his tour's interests by opposing Norman's new venture. McCumber believed Norman's accusation was payback, pure retaliation for his political opposition to the new tour idea. Underneath the spike mark story was a bigger conflict about power and control of the game itself. McCumber said something that year that captures his entire worldview. The rules are the brand. Players like Norman spent time talking about their brand, their image, their dominance, their legacy. But McCumber said the brand of golf itself was the rule book, not the players, not the celebrity, the rules. That is what made golf special. That is what made it different from other sports. If you let Norman play by different rules because he was #1, you destroyed the brand. You destroyed the game. McCumber could not allow that. He would not allow it. Norman won that tournament. McCumber shot 68 to Norman's 73 in that round, but the story ended in a confrontation that defined what professional golf was supposed to be. Number 3, Seve Ballesteros. This feud was completely different. This was cultural. Seve was the talisman of European golf, a master of escapology. He thrived in match play. He thrived in psychological warfare. He was brilliant but chaotic, a magician who could make shots from anywhere. But he also understood that golf was about controlling the opponent's mind. McCumber hated this approach. He believed professional golf should be a contest of skill, not a contest of who could annoy their opponent more. Save would cough during McCumber's backswing. He would clear his throat. He would jingle coins in his pocket. These were not accidents. These were deliberate tactics. McCumber labeled them Bush League. That was his exact word. Bush League. Unprofessional. Disrespectful. The psychology of match play was well known on the European tour. Gamesmanship was accepted there. It was part of the tradition. Players would do things to break their opponent's concentration. But McCumber argued that professional golf had a different standard, especially with television cameras watching, especially with the world looking on. You could not put the squeeze on your opponent with mind games. Not at that level. Not if you wanted to call yourself a gentleman of the game. In 1987, their friction was already evident. Sive played erratic golf that required multiple recoveries from rough. He had long delays. He demanded unusual rulings. For a player like McCumber, who valued pace of play and surgical precision, this was disruptive. This was chaos. It violated the quiet environment that McCumber believed golf required. But the real issue was deeply philosophical at its core. Sev saw the opponent as the target. You were supposed to put psychological pressure on the opponent. You were supposed to shake them emotionally. You were supposed to make them uncomfortable and less confident. McCumber saw the course and the rulebook as the target. You were supposed to manage yourself. You were supposed to play clean golf. You were supposed to let your skill and ability speak for itself. When Sev would put the squeeze on during a cold, windy day, he was doing it deliberately and with intention. His focus was on breaking his opponent's spirit and resolve. But McCumber viewed this as external interference in the game. The rules were meant to prevent this. The opponent is not the battlefield. The course is, the rulebook is. You do not win by annoying someone. You win by playing better golf. This represented a fundamental disagreement about what competition meant, what respect meant, what being a professional golfer meant. McCumber would never accept Sev's tactics, and Sev would never understand why McCumber was so rigid about it. It was a clash of cultures, old world American discipline versus European match play psychology, and it defined their entire relationship on the course. Number 4, Bernhard Langer, the 1991 Ryder Cup at Kiowa Island, South Carolina. The War by the Shore. This was the biggest stage of all. This was where McCumber's feuds went fully public and fully intense. The Ryder Cup had become a media spectacle by 1991. It was no longer gentlemanly. It was warfare, international warfare, between continents, between pride and national honor. McCumber had a significant dispute with Bernhard Langer, the respected German golfer. The issue was ball marking, the rules of ball marking. On the putting green, after you mark your ball, you have to put it back exactly where it was. Exactly. Not close. Not approximately. Exactly. The rules are clear. McCumber accused Langer of not returning his ball to the exact spot where he had marked it. He said Langer was gaining a minute but significant advantage. He said it was gamesmanship that skirted the edges of legality. Langer was a meticulous player. He was slow. He scrutinized every variable, but McCumber interpreted this meticulousness as a cover for disrespect. McCumber said something that became famous. He said Langer was not a gentleman. He said Langer knows what he did. He moved that ball marker intentionally. He was trying to gain an advantage. This was not just a comment. This was an accusation. This was a public statement about another player's integrity, and it rippled through both teams. The tension nearly led to a physical altercation. Players were angry. The European team was offended. The American team was defensive. This was supposed to be a sporting event. Instead, it became a confrontation about honor, about whether you could trust the other player, about whether the rules were just words or if they meant something real. In a sport that prides itself on not having officials on the field, McCumber's public accusation was seen as a breach of the unwritten code. You were not supposed to call out another player publicly. You were supposed to handle disputes privately in the locker room. You were supposed to be gentlemen, but McCumber saw it differently. He believed the code of the rules superseded the code of the locker room. The rules came first. The integrity of the game came first. Millions of people were watching now. Millions of people around the world were paying attention. So the scrutiny had to increase too. You could not play fast and loose with the rules on a stage like that. You could not let people think golf was anything less than completely fair. This incident solidified McCumber's reputation as a policeman, a guy who would not let things slide, a guy who would challenge even the biggest names. Even Bernhard Langer, a great player, a respected player in his own right, had to answer to the rules the way McCumber saw them, and that changed the dynamics of the entire Ryder Cup. It showed that McCumber was serious, deadly serious. He was not playing politics. He was not protecting anybody. Why does all of this matter so much? Mark McCumber left a legacy extending far beyond his wins and losses on the course. His willingness to challenge the biggest players forced the PGA Tour to professionalize its officiating standards dramatically. After Norman, after Langer, the tour realized they could not have drama like that anymore. They could not have player versus player with no neutral observer. So they expanded the presence of rules officials. Now almost every group in a high-stakes tournament has an expert watching, making immediate calls. His opposition to Seve's tactics contributed to a broader shift in match play etiquette. Modern players are more aware of television cameras, more aware of social media consequences. They do not get away with bush league behavior like McCumber complained about. Television created accountability. McCumber was an early voice for televised ethics. He understood that when millions of people were watching, the standards had to be higher. His course design work was an extension of the same philosophy. Over 50 courses, 30 that he designed personally. He worked with architects to create layouts that rewarded the right way of playing. Accuracy, club selection, course management, not raw power. The courses reflected his beliefs: disciplined, strategic, uncompromising. McCumber stood at the gateway between two eras of golf: the gentleman's game of the past and the celebrity-driven industry of the future. His feuds were the friction points of that transition. Even though he made enemies, even though people called him a policeman and rules dictator, his influence on the game was profound and lasting through decades. He reminded everyone that the rules matter, that the field must be protected always, that you do not win by being bigger than the game. You win by respecting the game, by honoring the rulebook carefully, by understanding that golf only works if everyone plays the same game. That is the true brand. That is what Mark McCumber fought for his entire life. That is what his hatred was really about. Not petty spite, not personal grudges or vindication. A deep commitment to protecting something he believed in, like a sentinel guarding the field, like a guardian of the game itself. If you made it through this entire story, thanks for listening. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment telling us which feud shocked you the most. Hit that hype button one more time. Show us some support. Because stories like this need to be told. Stories about men who stood their ground firmly, who refused to compromise, who protected something bigger than themselves.